It's now December, and over the next few months we will have the constant threat of bad weather. On this episode, I'm going to talk with you about what you should do if because of bad weather or any other reason you can't get to work. I will also answer a student question on disclosing your medications to an employer, and I will give you this week's job leads. It's the week of December 2nd through the 6th, and this is the QC Step Podcast. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the QC Step Podcast. I'm Corey Finneran. You can connect with QC Step on your social networking accounts. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Go to qcstep.com/Facebook, and we are at QC Step on Twitter and Instagram. This is a great way for you to get information from us, and it's also a great way for you to stay in contact with us and ask us questions on employment. Last week, Isaiah sent in a question to me on Facebook about the drug testing process. I'm happy to report that he got the job, and that's really cool to hear, so congratulations, Isaiah. We have another student submitted question this week, and this comes from Morgan, and she asks, should an employer know what kind of medication you take? And this is a great question. In the next few weeks, I plan to do an episode on whether or not you should disclose your disability to a potential employer or a current employer. And this question is kind of related to that. To start off, I would say that if you're not comfortable with telling an employer about a medication, no matter what that medication is, don't do it. If you are taking medication that has no impact on your productivity at work, I would say there's no reason to tell them about it. Let's say if you have asthma and you carry an inhaler. I think there would be nothing wrong with telling an employer just so that they know that you carry an inhaler. In fact, I would actually suggest that you let your employer know that if that's the case. Now, let's say it's something like a medication for an ADHD diagnosis. I would not suggest that you tell your employer about that medication. I was trying to think of scenarios where, and when looking at this question, I was trying to look at scenarios where you would tell an employer about that medication, and I did come up with one. So let's say that your doctor is changing your medicine and you're finding that in between medications you're having trouble concentrating and you're afraid that it could impact your success at work. You might want to tell your employer and have this conversation privately with them. Ask them if you can speak with them in private. You could tell them that you're on an ADHD medication, or just say you're on a medication for attention, and that your doctor has changed your medications and that you've been finding it more difficult to concentrate. If you feel that your work may be affected, you may want to have this conversation. Really, this question is best answered on a case-by-case level. There are lots of factors to consider in this topic, and if you would like some guidance, speak with your step teacher or your co-op teacher or Gary or Carrie. And if you would like to talk with Gary or Carrie about this topic or any other topic, email me info@qcstep.com and I will pass it along to them. So if you have any questions on employment, whether it's on applications, interviews, situations in the workplace, anything like that, you can send them to us on Facebook, you can tweet them at me, or you can email info@qcstep.com. Before I get started here with our main topic, holiday season in the busiest part of the year for many businesses is in full swing. If you were hired in a seasonal position, make sure that you go back and watch episode number 45 of the podcast. On that episode, I give you 5 tips for turning a temporary seasonal position into a permanent job. You can find all of our old episodes. Right now there's 47 of them, and that's a lot of different topics, and those are all on our website, qcstep.com, and they're also on our YouTube page, youtube.com/qcstep. As I mentioned in the intro, we're heading into winter, and when I was at Sherrard last week, Mrs. Dahlstrom and Mrs. Gresch suggested that I talk with you about what to do if you're not able to get into work because of the weather or really any type of reason that involves transportation, like your car won't start. So on this episode, I will tell you what to do in this type of a situation. First off, let this be a rare exception. And what I mean by that is an employer will be much more understanding of this type of situation if you're always on time every day. If you're always late and you call in sick to work all the time, an employer is less likely to be understanding in this type of situation. Showing a good work ethic by being at work every day that you're scheduled and by being on time, it helps you create and exhibit the characteristic of being trustworthy. And if there is one thing that you want your employer to think about you, it's that you're trustworthy. So let this situation of being late to work because of transportation issues, let this be a rare exception. And I think that your supervisor will be much more understanding. Secondly, make your alternate plans now. We typically have 3 to 5 days of warning before a storm, a winter storm, or if we're looking at car issues, sometimes you realize that your car is running rough. Plan ahead. Start lining up backup transportation right away. And this might be parents, grandparents, friends, neighbors. If a big storm is coming, or if your car is running poorly, get a hold of these people right away and tell them the shifts that you have scheduled to work and find out who is available to give you rides at the times that you need. Maybe you don't have much family in the area or something like that. Look at public transportation options. Find out what the bus routes are and the times for the bus routes. And if public transportation isn't going to work for you, then maybe look at a taxi service. And you wouldn't want to take a taxi to work every day, but if that's your only option in a situation like this, you may want to look into it. The third thing to do if you can't get to work because of weather or transportation issues is communicate with your employer. Make sure that you have a phone number for your employer. You should get that on your first day of work. Save it on your phone and also keep it at home and probably even put it in your wallet or your purse. Communication is really important in these situations. If there's a day coming that you expect to have a transportation issue, tell them in advance. Tell them that your car is running poorly and you'll be taking it to the mechanic and that you're trying to line up alternate transportation. Again, this should be a rare occurrence. If it happens too much, you will be seen as unreliable and not trustworthy. But if you know that there is a chance that you will have a transportation issue, it's best to let them know early. That way they can plan ahead for it and be ready when you're not there when your shift is supposed to start. So you've let them know a day or two ahead of time that you may have transportation issues, and as it turns out, you do. Okay, so maybe the person that agreed to give you a ride won't be able to pick you up right when you need them to, and it looks like you might be, let's say, 15 minutes late to work. As soon as you know this, call your employer and tell them. Because you've been communicating with them from the beginning of the situation, they will know that this is a reason that you're late, not an excuse. Tell them when you arrive, tell them what time you plan to arrive, and apologize for any bind that it puts them in. So you get to work and you're late because of the weather or transportation issues. The last thing to do in this situation is offer to make up the time. When you arrive, apologize again to the supervisor. Tell them that you are able to stay late and make sure that your work gets done. Offer to come in on another day or tell them to let you know if there is someone that calls in sick on a day that you have off and you'll come in and work for that person. This is a tough topic for me to talk about because I don't think you should ever be late to work. But it's not realistic to think that these things never happen. When I was a teenager, I had an unreliable car that I never knew if it would start or I never knew if it would keep running. You don't want these situations to ever arise, but in the real world, they do happen. And I think that if you follow these tips and strategies on handling these situations, your employer will see that you as someone that cares about employment and takes work seriously. It makes you appear more responsible and more trustworthy. Things are really slowing down with job leads, but I do have a few to give you today. I post the job leads to qcstep.com on Monday mornings, and if there's an online application, I include that link. If you're going to be filling out an online application, be sure to go back and watch episode number 41 of the podcast. That episode is entitled 5 Tips for Filling Out Online Applications. The CVS in Rock Island is hiring cashiers. Adolph in East Moline is looking for counter help, and you can apply in person between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. Journeys in Moline, that's at South Park Mall, they're looking for sales associates, and Kmart in Rock Island is hiring cashiers. If you would like help with any of these applications or any other applications, you can contact Gary or Carrie through your STEP or co-op teacher, or you can email me info@qcstep.com, and I will pass it along to them. Well, that does it for this week's episode of the QC Step Podcast. Next week, my plan is to talk with you about how to handle a group interview. I was at UT this week and speaking with them about social media and how you can use it to get a job, and a few of the students were going to have a group interview. And while with an employer, not a practice one, but a real one with an employer. And while we tried to prepare you for interviews, typically what we're preparing you for is a one-on-one interview, and group interviews have a much different dynamic. So my plan is to talk with you about group interviews on the next episode. Thanks for listening, watching, and downloading, and I will be back next week with another episode of the QC Step Podcast.